Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be just making a quick video on how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! At basically any budget. So I'd like to take you through every tier of how much you can be paying for Yu-Gi-Oh! From free to $50 to over 200 or 300 or even more just exorbitant amounts of money. So with that said, let's get started. In tier 1 we have free. This is basically just playing online with friends because when you think about it, there's really no way to get Yu-Gi-Oh cards for free. Theoretically, you could have someone give you a deck core or something, loan out a deck. But even if you're purchasing cards for under $1, you can theoretically purchase a deck for under $1. But just shipping costs and realistically finding different sellers, it's going to add up to a minimum cost of about $5. So in the free tier, we have Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, which is Yu-Gi-Oh's official program for playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. But the issue with Master Duel is that the meta is a little bit stale. They've got a kind of funky ban list with Max C at 3, and matchmaking and uh, stalling and all these different problems on ladder are kind of a problem. So Master Duel is one option, but my preferred option is EDO Pro or Edo Pro, which is a free program to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Online, and it's got, you get all the cards automatically. You can play with friends, you can match up with friends, you can play with custom ban lists. It's just a great time. So if you're just starting learning Yu-Gi-Oh! And you don't want to spend any money on the game yet, I would highly recommend at least looking at Master Duel and then definitely playing some Edo Pro and getting used to the game before you spend any money on it. All right, next we've got Tier 2, and this is decks that are under $10. And pretty much for under $10, you can get the core of any reasonable deck, any like essentially cheap archetype. And what I mean by that is stuff like Melfi's, which are incredibly cheap. This would be my go-to option here. They're incredibly cheap. They've got lots of interaction. They're getting new support. They've just got a bunch of new support in the set, and they're also just adorable. We've also got stuff like Appliancer, which I also made a deck profile for recently. Which, granted, Appliancer hasn't received a lot of support recently, but it is a fun archetype. It's got some cool extra deck monsters, and it feels fleshed out enough that it's worth playing. And then lastly, we've got Guncan over here. This is one that I haven't made a profile about yet, but it's a pretty interesting archetype. It just got a new wave of support, and it's incredibly cheap as well, with cards sitting at 1 to 5 cents for the most part. In this tier, we also have other decks like Crawler, like Tindangle, which, just to name a few, which essentially you can build the cores of for incredibly cheap. The cards tend to be from 1 to 10 cents for most of these decks, with extra deck cards maybe costing in the 20 cents range. So for under $10, you can get an entire core of a deck without, some of the staples like hand traps that you might play in the higher tiers. Speaking of staples, there are some budget versions of staples that you can play for under $10. Examples are spells like Monster Reborn. These are just great generic staples that are incredibly cheap. I believe Monster Reborn is about 25 cents. Then there's also stuff like Lost Wind, which can negate a monster. And there's also cards like Titanicider, Warning Point, which are essentially Lost Wind with other, they're also monster negation. They just have other stipulations. And these are great alternatives to hand traps for when you're not, when you're not willing to spend the money on hand traps. Because, playing a 10 to 25 cent card that has a monster negate on it is almost as good as the hand trap. It's just a little bit slower and can only be activated after you set it. So I would definitely recommend picking up a playset of Lost Wind when you're just getting into the game, because this is a phenomenal card and really just makes your deck feel a lot more safe. And lastly, we have stuff like extra deck staples. Um, it's incredibly surprising to me that Topologic Zeroboros is as cheap as it is. It's a 14-cent card, I think, these days, and is just so powerful for being so cheap. There's also stuff like Rasterliger, which is, like a pseudo access code talker analog, but really it's not going to do too much. But basically, this is just your generic extra deck slots. You've also got some like rank fours. I think stuff like Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer is pretty cheap. Um, maybe even Abyss Dweller these days, although that might be a little more expensive. So basically, just your generic cheap extra deck slots. All right, then we've got tier 3, and this one I bumped up to $40, which is essentially this could be 20, this could be 30, this could be $40. This is just the range where you're starting to add some more, you're starting to flesh out your deck a little bit more, and it's going to start feeling more like a competitive deck. First off, we're able to add some hand traps, stuff like Ghost Ogre, stuff like Ghost Mourner, um, I think Effect Veiler. Those are all, a couple of dollars a piece. And those are phenomenal additions to the deck because they will make your deck feel a lot more constructed, a lot more interactive, and you'll be able to stop your opponent's plays just so much more. Then we've got, I hate to put Mystic Mine on here, but Mystic Mine is a card that's playable, and more than Mystic Mine, just new archetypes open up for you. Archetypes that maybe have cards that are a couple of dollars that are key to their plays. Stuff like, I believe, Mathmix. They've got a couple of expensive cards, but for the most part, they're fairly cheap, and they've got a really good core going for them. So, though, stuff like Mathmix, stuff like I think Speedroids are another one that have a pretty cheap core, but just a couple of expensive cards. Those kinds of decks would be great to look at playing in this tier. And then lastly, we've got upgraded extra deck staples. Stuff like Borosword Dragon, which is a $5 card and almost as good a game ender as Access Code. If you're not looking to spend quite that much, there's Borreload Dragon, which is really good and is only about $1. And in this tier, you can basically afford any of the good Link 4s these days. Stuff like, Abyss Dweller, there's a bunch of them. Even you might be able to, I'm not sure how much it is these days, but stuff like Utopia Double can just be insane in this tier. And also, I believe this tier would open up the Synchro pool with stuff like Formula Synchron, TG Hyper Librarian, um, when it comes out, I'm not sure how expensive it's going to be, but the new level 8 Excel Synchro Dragon or whatever it is might fall into this tier. So basically, just a bunch of generic extra deck stuff that can make your plays much more explosive. All right, and now here's a huge jump. We've got tier 4, which I've put at under $150. And the reason for this huge jump is because aside from more archetypes opening up, the real massive jump from tier 3 to tier 4 is going to be your generic staples. Stuff like Ash Blossom, which is still a $20 card to this day. Stuff like Imperm, which I think is around $10. Zeus, which I think is $15 to $20 these days. These cards will just dramatically improve your deck. Melfies are cool, but you add in Zeus and they become just so much more powerful. Any deck will benefit from Ash Blossom or Imperm, and when you're able to just drop a little bit more money on staples, that's when your deck can start feeling truly constructed, feeling like a proper, powerful, potent, a deck that can really win games. And there are also some more archetypes do open up at this level. Some decks that might not have been previously available. You might be able to build like tier elements in this tier. Although realistically, if you're, getting the tier elements deck plus the hand traps, that's going to be a little more. But realistically, this is the tier where you can start really playing what feels like a constructed deck. All right, and then lastly, we've got tier 5, and I've just labeled this as $200 plus. This is where you've got the really best cards in the format. You've got stuff like Sprite Blue, a 60-ish to $70 card, but key in the arguably best deck in format, which is, of course, Sprites. You've got incredibly powerful board breakers like Ultimate Slayer. Obviously, in lower budget tiers, you can use stuff like Dark Ruler no more. to gain a similar effect. But in this tier, stuff like Ultimate Slayer, like Forbidden Droplet, those board breakers are incredibly expensive but incredibly good. Then we've got everyone's favorite extra deck boss, Access Code Talker, which is just an incredible card, but sitting at $50, this card is not cheap. And in this slot, we've also got stuff like Apollosa, other generic extra deck monsters, which are just so powerful. And that's about it for this video. Um, Hopefully that gave you a general overview of the different sort of budget tiers of Yu-Gi-Oh! And what you should look at playing in each tier. Hopefully if you're new to Yu-Gi-Oh! You'll have seen this and you try out Edo Pro and maybe you get into it. Maybe it's not for you. If you're already playing, you've got a budget deck, maybe you found some way to upgrade your deck, you found the next step if you're looking to um, spend a little more on the game. And if you're already a constructed player, but you want to build, a side hobby, but you don't want to break the bank, maybe you can try out one of those budget deck options I showed. So hopefully there should be something for everyone. Well, with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked the video, I would love it if you gave a like on the video or subscribed. Means a lot. But with that, I will see you next time.